Hello, everybody. Welcome along to the Debrief live on the Liverpool Echoes Blood Red YouTube channel. After Liverpool suffer a humbling defeat at the Etihad to Manchester City, 4-1, it finished at full time after Mohamed Salah had scored the opener. Basically, Liverpool collapsed in the second half is the talking point of the game, I think. You join me, Patrick Smith, though, and Matt Addison from Liverpool.com. We're going to dissect that one and go over all the talking points. We are live, as I said, everyone. So make sure you drop us your comments and thoughts in the comment section below. And hopefully we'll get to answer a couple of those by the end of the show. But Matt, what's your initial reaction to that one? I mean, the dreaded 12:30 kickoff against a very good side of Manchester City. We didn't exactly have our hopes high, did we? But pretty disappointing given the circumstances there.
Yeah, I think at half time you're kind of thinking maybe Liverpool can go on and get something from the game. I think first half it was reasonably close and obviously get the goal and go ahead. And there's certain bits that you can look at. I think Salah was fairly lively. I think there was a couple of bits with Jota and obviously Cody Gakpo as well. They did okay in that first half, but yeah, second half it was just a collapse, wasn't it? It's familiar issues. You were always, I think, a little bit worried when you see that it's a midfield two against, De Bruyne, Rodri and Gundogan. To only have two players in there, I think, is a risk, even when those two players are at their peak. But obviously Jordan Henderson and Fabinho just haven't got the legs that they used to have. But, I mean, that partly explains, I think, what happened sort of behind them with the back four, but not completely. I think you look at someone like Virgil van Dijk was miles off it. The rest of the defence, really, Andy Robertson, for the first two goals, really poor. Just all the way across that back line, there's just too many gaps, really. And like I say, partly you can explain that with the midfield. There's not exactly a load of protection in front of them, but individually and collectively across that back line, they just lack the intensity. They lack the kind of sort of speed, really, that you need. They seem to have lost a yard of pace. I thought Trent has done that for the majority of this season, but the others, it seemed to have rubbed off a little bit on them today. So yeah, it just wasn't good, was it? It really wasn't good in the second half, and it's a real shame because the first half, I think there was genuinely some good bits there. There was some good signs, and we could have been talking about a very different game had Rodri been sent off, but Liverpool can't have too many complaints. I think the worry for me is that you look at the body language and you look at the way that they kind of collapsed in that second half. I don't think is great news. You can lose, obviously, away at Manchester City. Liverpool have lost there plenty of times, but to go out in that limp way, to kind of end the last 10 or 15 minutes, I mean, City were just walking around with the ball and Liverpool just couldn't lay a glove on them. It just wasn't a great look, I would say. And yeah, we keep saying it, but it's only, it's less than a year since these two were the best in the country. And I think we knew already, obviously, going into this game that Liverpool had dropped off. But when you actually see it like that, yeah, the last 20, 30 minutes, even with the substitutions, which made no difference, yeah, it was a painful watch.
Yeah, that gap is growing bigger and bigger. I mean, I've said this on podcasts probably 100 times this season. I always do say I'm reluctant to question players' commitment because they are elite professional footballers. They, give everything for the shirt. But it's just looked once again today, like so many times this season, the heads have dropped. The body language is terrible. And now I'm not sure whether that may well be, as a result of the international break. I mean, not to pinpoint Andy Robertson, but doing exactly that. He looked absolutely knackered. It seemed as though numerous Liverpool players started the match today, Matt, like they were playing in the 70th, 80th minute from kickoff. I mean, they looked really knackered by half-time, didn't they? As if they're sort of clinging on to that 1-1 draw. And then, of course, the capitulation in the second half. I mean, do you think the international break could be perhaps to blame for that? A lot of players playing two matches in the space of a week for their countries. And then, as Klopp was saying before the match, they only had one training day together before an early kickoff away from home. I mean, it's not exactly ideal preparation. Do you think that's any sort of excuse?
I don't think so, just purely because it's the same for Manchester City, isn't it? I mean, most of their players will have been away. Obviously, Rodri played in that game against Scotland. Jack Grealish will have played for England. The majority of their players will have been in exactly the same situation. And Liverpool did have players that didn't go away on international duty that they could have played. Obviously, Darwin Núñez wasn't quite fit enough to go from the start. Didn't really do anything anyway when he came on. There were other options that Liverpool could have gone with, but chose not to. And yeah, there's a couple of comments that I can see that have come in, sort of questioning those last sort of half an hour. It looked as if they had given up. Whether they were just completely exhausted, I don't know. But yeah, it just wasn't a great look, was it? I think, I've picked out Robertson before, but he wasn't the only one. But certainly for the second goal, for the first one probably as well, it's just just a combination of things, really. I mean, he gets dragged out. Jordan Henderson, I think, on the first one is dragged out, and I know they're coming up against Mahrez and De Bruyne on that side of the pitch, but Liverpool at their peak, it just would be a lot more easy, or a lot more difficult, I should say, for Manchester City to cut through Liverpool. It was just so easy. Even the Grealish goal, they just walk through, really. There's no speed or intensity, or it's not a great move. I suppose at least with the first goal, you can kind of say that they've moved Liverpool about a little bit, and the defence has got pulled apart too easily, but it is a good move and obviously an easy finish at the end for Alvarez. But yeah, it's just they just lack a little bit of intensity, and it's nothing new. We knew that going into the game, but yeah, I mean, I thought it was a bold move to go with the front four or the 4-4-2 or however you want to look at it for that exact reason. So I can see why Jurgen Klopp went with that gamble, but ultimately it just hasn't really paid off. They didn't do enough. They didn't score enough goals to make, maybe if the game had gone 2-0, I think Salah had that chance to pass to Diogo Jota, I think it was, who was up with him on the counter. Maybe if something like that had gone for them, maybe it could have been different. But I mean, even that, I mean, with this Liverpool, even at 2-0 and maybe against 10 men, you still wouldn't have been particularly confident that they could have kicked on and gone for it. So, yeah, it just summed up the season, really. I think there's still a lot to play for. I still think, the games that the teams around them have got to play over the next sort of week or so, if Liverpool can bounce back from this, get something against Chelsea, and then go into the Arsenal game with a little bit of confidence, there's still a lot to play for. I don't think this changes much. I think to some extent you could have called it a bit of a free hit going into it, but it doesn't make it any easier when you have to sit there and watch that last 20 minutes.
No, it doesn't at all, does it? I mean, the point you make there about the first and second goals, they're so similar, and that's the exact situation where we're used to seeing high energy pressing from Liverpool, quick decisions made, high pace defending. It was really sluggish. I mean, Robertson sort of meandered out, didn't he, for the first one? Got caught out of position, the ball came across. The defence just all caught out of position. I mean, Konate and Van Dijk were on the edge of the box when the ball was actually played into Alvarez. And then for the second goal as well, I mean, the space De Bruyne had, it was just, it's an embarrassment, Matt. But before we move on then to talk about more of the negatives, let's talk about the one positive. Liverpool did score first away from home in a 12-30 kickoff away at Manchester City. It was a very nicely taken goal from Mohamed Salah. And I know the match obviously took a very sour turn for Liverpool. But in the first half, Matt, alone, let's try and take some positives. They did show some very decent signs of counter-attacking. It was quite reminiscent of what we saw against Man United, actually, wasn't it, in parts? They could have been 2-0 up, as you mentioned there, with Salah had squared it to Jota. Those are maybe the positives we can take from this one, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's no massive surprise. I think Mohamed Salah is always going to cause a team problems, and it's a team like City. When you see the first goal, I think Liverpool had something like 4 players, and they had 2 in terms of that counter attack, and obviously players were coming back and all the rest of it. But I do think if you've got a team like City, it does kind of play into Liverpool's hands a bit. We've seen it obviously against United and against City in the game at Anfield, and there is opportunities really for Liverpool to go on and take those chances, but unfortunately for them, they are going to have to take pretty much every chance that they create against City, because you just know that at some point they are going to concede. So there is a little bit of pressure, I think, on those forwards to try and find that goal and just to kind of outscore their own problems, really is the only real way out of it at the moment, because that's just the way it's going. So I think that's probably why you went with the front four. Obviously, the fact that they've not exactly got loads of midfield options either. Just as an aside on that, I think it's interesting that Curtis Jones and Fabio Carvalho weren't on the bench, but Arthur Melo was.
Yeah. Shaking hands with Pep Guardiola as well after City's goal.
Yeah, is an interesting one, but yeah, no, it's such a hard one to dissect. I think Mohamed Salah was good. I think Cody Gakpo and Diogo Jota were good in the first half, but Jota in particular looked absolutely knackered in the second half and just faded, didn't really do anything. Obviously, the changes didn't really do much either. So, yeah, the attack was good to an extent, but I think that will very quickly be forgotten off the back of what happened in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair to Jota, he's come back from a big injury, but it looked like he was, carrying a fridge around with him for some parts. So it just seems really slow, which is really unfortunate after such a serious injury. But I mean, Matt, most of the comments we've got, I mean, it once again revolves around the midfield, as Egan Adams says here. We've lost our ability to control a game. We need a new midfield. Without them, we'll continue to look foolish. I mean, there's, I won't pick them up, but there's so many more similar comments regarding midfield. Do you think, once again, the midfield was the problem today, and that is why Liverpool lost the game ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes back to that, doesn't it? It's far too easy to just pick out those two players. I actually thought that they certainly weren't the worst individual performers. I thought Fabinho had an okay game. Henderson as well did okay, but it's just a lot of work for them to do, isn't it?
It's almost harsh to play them as a two, to be honest, wasn't it? Against arguably the best midfield in Europe. I mean, you're always going to
Exactly.
struggle with the two, aren't you?
Exactly. You're outnumbered even before you take into the fact that you'd probably say that Gundogan, well, you definitely would say that Gundogan, Rodri and De Bruyne individually are all better than the midfielders that Liverpool have got. Any of those three would walk into Liverpool's team. So, yeah, it wasn't exactly setting them up for failure, and I don't know exactly what else he could have done. I mean, I mentioned Curtis Jones and Fabio Carvalho weren't on the bench, but it's not like either of them could have particularly played in the game and done any better, you would have thought, than the other players who played instead of them. But yeah, we know that they need to change the midfield. We know that that's a huge issue, and that's why I wasn't convinced going into it that a front four was the best way of going about it. But at the same time, I'm reluctant to criticise them because I can see why they did it. It worked to a certain extent, and they don't really have many other options. So yeah, maybe we'll see that again. And I mean, look, if Liverpool play like they did in the first half for 90 minutes at Stamford Bridge on Tuesday, they'll probably get something out of that match, and hopefully they can kick on. I think it was a tough watch, but I think you've just got to kind of just put it behind them now and hope that they can be a little bit better in future games. They're not going to play Manchester City every single week, but at the same time, you'd quite like them not to have given up quite like they did.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, it was that free hit of sorts, and I think everyone now just needs to sort of put it behind them and move on from it. But yeah, once again, it's an early kickoff on a Saturday. Once again, Liverpool have lost. Once again, Liverpool are terrible. And once again, the midfield is largely to blame, although maybe not necessarily entirely the individual's fault today. But we'll wrap up the debrief there. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us and dropping us your comments along with it. I've been Patrick Smith, joined by Matt Addison. Make sure you subscribe and stick around right here on the Blood Red channel because we'll bring you Jurgen Klopp's reaction as soon as we have it. So make sure you subscribe and turn notifications on for that one. But for now, thank you for joining us on the debrief. We'll catch you again soon.